parents, Del Underbaki, speaking about the at-risk plan. Del, you know the work, I mean, you know the rules. 3 minutes. Tell me when to start the clock, and I will do that.
We're ready to go. Good afternoon. My last public comment highlighted a concern about our Opportunity Youth Initiative only supporting a fraction of our at-youth population. Last August, the district's at-risk numbers were estimated at 1,300. Opportunity Youth targets attention towards around 450. This leaves a significant majority still waiting for intervention. I see the Office of Youth Engagement as a way for the school board to be accountable for PI 25 directives for all at-risk students. Every at-risk student needs to receive full disclosure of their FAPE entitlement as part of their notification. In past meetings, Dean and others have encouraged us to consider slowing things down for those who have fallen behind. The Wisconsin Constitution provides for 20 years of public education for all Wisconsin citizens. Our at-risk plan provides extended graduation timelines as an intervention option. State legislatures and DPI representatives question the logic of withholding evidence-based wraparound at-risk interventions in the quest of raising district report card scores. No one is applauding efforts to have unprepared at-risk students receiving diplomas and forfeiting their public education entitlement. Upon identification, the Office of Youth Engagement needs to make sure every eligible student is informed of their public education entitlement rights. Project U-Turn's 10-year evaluation highlights 2 cautionary tales. The first, commit to early strategic and systemic intervention. Our at-risk plan clearly states our compliance with PI 25 and commitment to interventions starting at the 5th grade. Opportunity Youth only documents cohort ages of 10th grade and older. We need an Office of Youth Engagement to make sure every identified 5th grade and older at-risk student is provided customized and sustained intervention. This office needs to ensure we abandon our traditions of providing too little, too late for our most marginalized learners. The second, Project U-Turn acknowledges the corrosive consequences of granting credits towards graduation that don't reflect skills and knowledge required to move forward. Is there evidence that exposes a disproportionate lower bar of graduation achievement for MMSD at-risk students of color and students with disabilities? We need the Office of Youth Engagement to examine transcript evidence that supports the existence of a diploma mill through credit earning options including differentiated curriculum, work experience, and credit recovery. The Office of Youth Engagement needs to ensure that no at-risk student is encouraged to accept a graduation diploma before they demonstrate readiness to embrace their academic and career plan. This office needs to assure each at-risk student they have the time, the support, and the resources to achieve their North Star. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next order of business is an update on the MicroSchool. And
thank you. Thanks, TJ. I'd like to go ahead and invite our team up to join me. We've got Ricardo Hara, Alex Fralin, and Paris Eccles. We're thrilled to be giving you an update tonight on the MicroSchool. As a reminder, Ricardo actually led the charge over this past school year on better understanding the strengths, assets, and needs of a subset of the at-risk population, which Del just pointed out, which we've described as Opportunity Youth. What we had hoped to do, if the opportunity arose in the second half of the school year, was to prototype some kind of strategy to jumpstart our thinking and, more importantly, our learning about how to serve this population of students better. And that opportunity actually arose in the MicroSchool serving La Follette High School. I've got to tell you, I want to congratulate the team that got after this opportunity, Paris, you, the entire staff, but also the students and families who were willing to participate and try something with us. We're here to provide an update on how that went, what happened, what went well, what didn't go well, what did we learn, and where do we go from here. So with that said, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Ricardo.
Thanks, Jen. I think that was a great way to kick things off because we do want to begin with our sincerest and deepest thank yous for the folks that were involved. This entire prototype from ideation to launch, right? And we're talking staff at La Follette, staff here in central office, members of the community, and of course, like the students and families that really came on board and said, like, yeah, we want to try this, right? So yeah, thank you. Thanks, Paris. That was really great. So let's get right into it. I think Jen provided a really great context in terms of, like, hey, this didn't come out of nowhere, right?
Right.
This has been a kind of a year-long charge and work that had been happening, and the conditions were right to launch something in the spring semester. Namely because we had some community partners that stepped up and said, we want to do something to support opportunity youth, specifically students that were struggling significantly at school to find their path. And that really allowed us, and when we talk about our partners, talking about Life Center Madison out on Stoughton Road, about a mile from La Follette, roughly, and Selfless Ambition, who stepped up and said, like, hey, we want to help, right? So the timing worked out perfectly for us to prototype this charge of launching like this MicroSchool, right? Which is essentially a space that met students where they are as holistically as possible, right? Cognitively, social emotionally, and design with them, right? Which is like the unique part was like this, let's bring kids into the mix and include them in this power sharing and deciding when something is not working, how we're gonna shift things to better support you, right? So we brought a team of incredibly dedicated, passionate individuals from across the community to help design this space, right? And that included community partners, La Follette staff, folks from here, staff from here, central office, some members of the community. And we brought in some students who at one point in their high school career had found themselves off track at La Follette, actually. And they were part of the design team from the get-go. And I mean, they were some of the most like insightful pushers throughout that process, which was an awesome experience. And we got after it. And what we did is we designed this MicroSchool experience in about a 4-week window, this 4-week runway, which I think the members of the team would acknowledge that maybe that isn't the most ideal length of time to launch something, right? And at the same time, in that amount of time, we were able to accomplish quite a bit. We were able to accomplish quite a bit of good. And we also want to name that good for the team is not good enough, right? And we want to strive to continue pushing to improve upon what we learned in this 9-week prototype, right? So let's talk about what we did and how we launched this MicroSchool. And for that, I'm going to pass it off to Alex to talk about our students.
Yeah, so the design team started with the question, who would most benefit from this type of strategy? And knowing that a good number of the members of the design team were not a part of the daily La Follette experience, we relied heavily on La Follette staff. More specifically, Paris Echols, the assistant principal here, and thanks for joining us tonight as well, as Patrice Hutchins, who was a former social worker, then took on the role of the dean last year. They had an intimate knowledge of a wide variety of students, but they were best positioned to ask that question, or answer that question. And so they engaged multiple students after we designed some early kind of core values and guiding principles about what that space would do and how it would serve students. Knowing these students and their families quite well, they engaged these students and families in one-on-one conferences. I think there were actually a couple of home visits for parents who actually couldn't get to the school. And to think about taking the kids through a reflection process that asked them to think about where they were right now in their high school career and where were their needs not being met. Because these are the students who were struggling in school for a host of reasons. And to ensure that their needs were being met, we actually had to engage them in rich conversations. For some, that was like 3, 4, or 5 conversations, and Paris can actually speak to some of those earlier on. For some who said, nope, that's not for me. And some said, I need some time to think about it, and some said yes right off the spot. Once we looked at the list of all the students that they brought back to the team, we did notice that there was a heavy number of male students and a good number of students of color. So it started out as a mix. And we started to ask the question, what are the things that would need to be in place for students' identities to be fully developed and nurtured, for them to have a space to be able to tackle some of the issues that were actually getting in their way. And for us to think about the type of staff that would be in that space, we had a a large number of staff of color to understand the perspectives of students and actually creating the space and the curricular experiences that we would want them to have. So we understood that earlier on, and the team made a pretty conscious decision about selecting the students that did say yes. It ended up being 13 black and multiracial students. I think the team was proud of that decision. We talked to the students about it earlier on, and parents can share some of those conversations. I mean, it hadn't been almost a week or two later where students understood the benefit of having that space customized for them, given that it was largely male and students of color. We're proud of the fact that students, one, had the say in saying yes. Parents were concerned. Our first parent meeting, we tackled that issue from the jump. Given some parents' concerns about historical perceptions of alternative programs and how students were placed in them rather than offered it to them as an option. And by the second parent meeting, we had parents that were fully bought in. We had 50% of the parents who came consistently, who both invested and understood that the space was designed for and with students, and not necessarily to students.
So we have our student body, and what the first initial weeks of the launch of the Microschool looked like was it was pretty fluid, as the adults and the youth really got to know one another, and specifically as the adults tried to better understand what the needs and the wants were of the students, particularly around their academic needs, cognitive needs, social emotional needs, and they really designed a space with students around what those needs and wants were, right? So there was a really heavy focus on literacy, writing, critical thinking development, identity development, self-regulation, topics like that. And what the overall model really evolved into was really this very flexible, responsive environment that Mary Harris could touch a bit upon, but I can just give you an example. Like, we tried things out for the first couple of weeks, right? And the youth are the ones who were telling us, like, hey, we like this, but we're not really digging this. We need more experiential opportunities, right? We want more career exploration, chances to explore careers, right? So really giving them the opportunity to listen to students and shape the space to what their needs and wants were was really a hallmark or key characteristic of what this space was.
And part of the conversations we had with families and students around the Microschool opportunity was explicitly stating the fact that we want your voice in the room at every single phase of designing what experiential opportunities look like, what field trips look like, from the classwork to actual internship. Students have voice, and it was made very clear to us that they felt that their high school experiences and middle school experiences for some had no level of input from them. So a lot of the families and a lot of students were pleased with the fact that I can actually have a schooling experience for my child, which actually gave them a chance to talk about what that experience would look like on a daily basis. So that was a strong hook for many of the students to be involved with the Microschool.
So when you look at what we learned from the past 9 weeks, if we were to take the success metrics that we identified at the start of this prototype, generally across the board, we fared pretty well. We saw a pretty good increase in the rates of attendance for many of the youth. I know we highlighted one student who had an attendance rate well below like 50%. 38%. Explicitly, 38%, and had at the end of the school year was around 80% or so. In terms of academic efficacy, we saw a jump in the number of credits attained as compared to the previous quarter. The personal efficacy piece, many marked observations from adults in the space around students' growth from day one until the end of the 9 weeks around self-regulation, level of engagement, motivation, right? Improvements in that, as well as overall behavior, and the number of instances in where students were able to make an effort to restore the space. And we want to name, and we'll get into this in a second, that this whole experience and process was not perfect, right? There was challenges every single day, right? So it's not to say that suddenly students from day 2 were suddenly like not having trouble or like having challenges in the environment. The reality is that they were growing, right? And I'll get to address that in a second when we talk about the important lessons. But there were also increased moments of like that self-regulation, where like in day 1 they may have just like done something, and maybe 4 or 5 weeks in, they caught themselves, or right before, they would have done the same thing 5 weeks before, for an example, right? Or apologize immediately, which is great. We also, at the end of the experience, it was pretty clear that the students and the adults, families, excuse me, there was a pretty strong belief that they felt that the adults in the space cared about them and the kids, and their future and their well-being. And we had surveys, and we also had more of like the increased face-to-face interactions during family nights in particular. And then there are moments during the school day when we sit around during lunchtime talking with the youth, right? Which is really, really great. I want to just touch upon a few important lessons or takeaways from these 9 weeks. We saw success, and we saw good, right? But it's important to acknowledge that out of the challenges, we pulled these lessons here to achieve that good. One of which is the importance around staffing and infrastructure. So when we talk about staffing, we're talking about adults in a space like a microschool serving this group of youth, for example. They must be able to possess a certain degree of emotional resilience and an understanding that recognizes that like these youth are growing and they're learning and they're going to make mistakes, right? They're going to make lots of mistakes. So the adult definitely has to have this, we use the word grace, right? Has this grace of understanding that these youth are going to mess up sometimes, and the adult is going to have that emotional resilience to not hold a grudge, come in, and essentially turn that moment of mistakes into a teaching opportunity, right? And that's a lot, right? And that's a lot. And this is not to suggest that our team did not have that skill set. Rather, this is really to underscore the importance of what we saw as a team during our team meetings, where we'd step back and reflect on what's working, what's not working, recognizing this is critical. Like, adults need to have this, right? And that kind of segues into the second point around finding that balance around flexibility and structure. You need the adults that are able to extend that grace to the youth when they make a mistake, and at the same time be able to have a structure that's going to be able to create that learning environment, right? So it is that effective learning environment, right? Where you don't let students get away with things. Rather, you hold them to very high expectations, and you hold them to them, right? So finding that balance, it takes time, especially as a team in a new space. It takes time to find that balance working with youth. Looking at this idea of detoxing, right? It's an interesting word that the team used to describe really what we were seeing throughout these 9 weeks, particularly when it came to the type of learning environment that the team was and the youth working together trying to create, really trying to shift students from being dependent learners into independent learners, right? I could give one anecdote example of the type of like detoxing that I'm talking about. Students often engage as the weeks went on. It's pretty intense writing assignments, Socratic style seminars are over some various different topics. But I recall explicitly, let me remember this, Paris, like the first week and a half, within the first week rather, we handed out a graphic organizer for students to do some goal setting with some of the students, right? And I remember one of the students first said when he got that graphic organizer, he said, finally a worksheet, right? Which took a lot of the adults aback, because that's not what we want like learning to be about, right? Like they were craving these worksheets, and that's not the environment we're trying to create in that space, right? So, and that takes time, right? That definitely takes time. So that process of shifting to that independent learning, that's real. And that detoxing, how that manifests itself in a learning environment, right? It varies from student to student. It's real, and it takes time. So detoxing is real, and timelines aren't. It's gonna vary from student to student, right?
And one key piece with students, oftentimes we don't spend a lot of time talking about student identities and what that really means for a student, and we have to put a lot of work in building up student confidence and belief in themselves that you yourself inherently are brilliant and great and have strengths that you bring to the table, and you are an academic star. That concept for many other students in the space did not exist. So some of the pushback and disengagement that happened was from this idea of, you're asking me to do something that I, in my heart, mind, soul, don't believe I have. So we had to do a lot of like reprogramming and also the cheering on and getting them to understand, not only can you do this, but we're here in this space to help you achieve this, and we're going to celebrate your successes and help you understand that when you don't get it or understand or make a mistake, that's part of what being a learner is, and how you get back up from that is going to be key. Like, there was a lot of work that had to take place.
And yeah, lastly, the community partnerships. Just really want to underscore the importance of the community partnerships, right? We talk about our partnership with Life Center Madison and Selfless Ambition. Truly, like, you know the expression, like, a house doesn't make a home, right? Like people do. I just butchered that, but that's basically the idea, right? That Life Center Madison provided more than just a building for us to facilitate this really great experience with students. They really leaned in and supported us in a variety of ways, whether it be bringing in folks to serve as mentors to students, right? To bringing in lunch one day, about a surprise to the kids, you know, things like that. Really underscore the importance of the community partnership in this Microscope model. When we talk about what is needed to continue and sustain and potentially expand and scale this type of approach, we kind of identified three major buckets that we need to meet to do it, right? The first of which is ensuring that we have a dedicated team in place that exists outside of the microschool to manage and provide that direct logistical and instructional support that'll be needed, right? That'll also allow the staff to increase their time and focus on students as opposed to focusing on logistical things that might get in the way of that, right? And they would also serve as a very strong and immediate support for things like IEP transitions, right? Which were a challenge at the beginning of this prototype. We know that the Office of Youth Reengagement is going to serve a major role in ensuring and providing that infrastructure for any potential future microschool. The second bucket is this idea of a curated team. Choosing the adults that are going to be serving in the space very intentionally, ensuring that the adults that are there will be there full time to provide that consistency that youth really need, and also possess that, like the points you were just earlier around having that spirit, having that mindset towards with grace, you know, working with students with grace, and having that firmness still to really provide that structure. Just being very intentional about creating that team. And finding the transportation piece is really, really important also. Ensuring that we have access to public transportation so that students and families have easy access to get to the school and home and or work after the school day. And finally, I think I was going to close us off when we look at what comes next.
Mm-hmm. So we have, as you know, we won't be moving forward with this specific MicroSchool next year, and we've been working closely with the students and the families to ensure that they, one, had adequate advice and counseling as to the right option for next year. All the students, with the exception of one, has a transition plan in place. Most of the students have opted into one of our alternatives. There are a few students who may be returning back to La Follette, where we're engaging 2 of them right now. While that's happening, we started a conversation with our high school principals to think about MicroSchool as one particular option for the spring of next year, ensuring that the Office of Youth Engagement gets their team up and running, that they would actually identify members of their staff to work with members of that team to design the process over the next 6 months, knowing that we need adequate time to think about the space, time, money, and staff in particular, to make sure that any potential MicroSchool options are designed with high quality. What's not identified there is that we also are finalizing a guidance document taking all of the learnings and all the experiences from the family nights to the student selection to the transitions to the curriculum development to the work with partners, the good, bad, and the ugly, to actually design clear guidance, primarily for schools, but in partnership with the Office of Youth Engagement, so schools actually have a document that help them guide them in their decision making in the future.
Can I just add one thing? And it's not up there either. The Microschool model might be on pause as we refine and improve it. The relationships that we built with students and families, that's continuing, right? So we've been in communication with students and families since the last day of school, right? I had a student reach out to me today to check in and also talk about like next year, continue talking about next year. So that's continuing, and though that decision and talking with families about the decision was challenging, families felt affirmed in us naming that we're not going away. Mm-hmm. We're still going to be here, and we're going to support you into the next phase of their path for your student, right? Yeah, I want to name that. I think that's it. Yeah. So we're going to pause there.
Questions?
Yeah, we're going to pause there and open it up to
Comments. Kate, please first.
Thank you. I was excited to hear about this, so thank you. It was a great education. Can I ask the obvious question, which is why are we pausing? Yeah, that was the question. The first response to that is, and it was a tough decision, and it was really we needed more time to refine what had happened over the past 9 weeks. It was a lot, and we really just wanted to make sure we didn't rush into it, that we had the appropriate amount of time so we could compound the impact that we had during this fourth quarter. It was like the first, right? The second is we struggled with this also, but we didn't feel comfortable moving entirely forward, not knowing what the infrastructure was going to look like in terms of like the capacity to support a future microschool from outside. So when I reference the Office of Youth Engagement, for example, because that wasn't entirely in place, since they would be leading and providing the direct support to the microschool, for example, we didn't want to wait till midsummer, for example, and find out that it didn't happen and it be a challenge to sustain in the fall semester. Yes, it was a challenging decision, and we feel in the moment that we made it was the right one, and we're very optimistic about coming back in the spring, if not sooner, with a better model, a better refined MicroSchool 2.0. That's kind of how we see it. Okay. Yeah.
The staffing component is critical. We worked innovatively and really hard to approach people in that 4.5 weeks of planning to say, would you be interested, because we see something in you that we know kids would benefit from. And that was kind of in the moment. But given what we learned from the kids and from the families, and what we learned from the staff, is that it is critical that we both identify staff, but also provide the opportunity for staff to say, I want to be a part of that because I bring very specific skills to serving opportunity youth. And to do that, you'd have to identify them early in the process to ensure that schools can make the adequate adjustments in their staffing plans. And we know we just needed more time to do that. We did not want to be in a place of kind of begging people to be a part of it, and making sure that we were identifying the right staff members who demonstrated the right skill sets and commitment to ensure that the program is high quality.
I mean, yeah, do you want to?
I just wanted to add one other thing that I don't think you guys have mentioned, and it's not captured in the lessons learned, but I think it's something that we'll continue to think a lot about over time, which is the microschool concept, if we continue it, a place where kids stay in school, or is it actually just like a really intense intervention, right? Yeah. That would never be more than a semester, maybe a year in some scenario, right? But it's not a destination. It's a place where, at least in this case, I visited the Microschool, had a wonderful meeting with most of the students in Paris, and it was probably one of the best hours I've spent in the last year. I left very, very inspired. But for me, it was a place, I'm going to get emotional thinking about it. It was such a beautiful meeting. But it was a place of healing, right? And yeah. So it made me wonder, is this a destination or a kind of a place of healing, identity development, rejuvenation that leads then to a better, appropriate option? Sorry.
I just want to actually. Go ahead.
Just I maybe to key off of some of what you just said, some of what I just heard you say is that there was a lot of power in the intensity and intimacy of the experience, and that it was a cohort, that everybody had a choice to opt in, including staff. And so a little bit of how I hear you talking about next steps doesn't have that, right? And so it's a little bit of a question in my mind around, you know, if this is a cohort experience where people are choosing to participate and go through that intense experience, then it is a little bit of a different thing. It's not a destination, right? I think healing sounds very appropriate based on what you guys described. So it's just a question, because it feels like that's one of the lessons in the story you just told that may not be, at least in the way you've talked about next steps so far, present in how you're thinking about next steps. And part of that, I guess, so my other questions are also somewhat obvious. Probably they're all around resources, which is just as we think through what this looks like, we had a very narrow focus for a specific kind of gender, kind of racial makeup, part of the city, right? Like it was a very targeted group of young people. There's a lot of groups of young people that would answer those questions differently that we could support with something like this. And so thinking through how many cohorts are there, right? Like what does that actually look like? I guess I would love to see as we continue to push this forward, your thinking on how many cohorts are there? What are the demographics? Assumedly the experience looks different. And then obviously the resource staffing, et cetera, component to support what your vision is important for us to address at some point. So.
Me, Dean, Nikki, and I just want to pick up on what Jen said, is that I think that we need to be really explicit about whether this is a transitional, and if we do micro schools in the future, you know, is this a place where students go to complete their high school experience, or is it a place where they go from not the best place and we throw these intense resources in and hopefully take them to a better place where either a traditional high school or one of our alternative programs is a place where they can thrive. But I think we have to be really explicit up front about what we're trying to do, because those are two very, very different things. So.
This is a great example, TJ, of emergent learning, and I appreciate your question. But I don't know that we know yet, right? And I don't know that we can answer that question yet. I think it's a question we need to keep asking ourselves as we learn more about what the strategy is best utilized for. Yeah.
Dean, Nikki.
Okay, there's a bunch of things that I agree with here. One is that staffing and having the right kind of people there is a critical need. I agree with that. And the work that I do with people that struggle, the term I heard years ago was you have to be able to tolerate ambiguity. And it's a kind of a nicer way of saying you can't be, you have to have a high tolerance level for people telling you to your face to get screwed or not do anything. And also, there are a couple things that our friend Dell mentioned also, is that when I talk about slowing things down, it's not that yeah, go sit in the chair, here's some work, turn it in whenever you feel it. That's not what I mean. I mean is that you take the time to develop the relationship, to find out how you can work with this kid to get that kid to begin to trust you and break those barriers. That's what's necessary. So staff to understand what I meant, that's what I meant. And then the other thing that, there are two more things I want to ask you. One, when we changed to the BEP 4 years ago, one of the things, strategies we heard that were working in some other school systems, Cleveland, off the top of my head I remember, where they set up these resource rooms, they called them. And they weren't just timeout rooms, they weren't the room where you go for in-school suspension. My vision of it was this, where they get to stay there right in school, in a place like where they could get this type of programming right in the school, which eliminates the need to have us find off-site locations, which is going to be problematic, and it's going to be an obstacle for us that's going to be very difficult to overcome. We can't find the places like this that are all over the place. We got to make our own, and I think we can do it on campus. We don't have to go off campus to do this, and I think we can do it in every high school and even in every middle school, where we can have the resource room with programming like this as opposed to a glorified in-school suspension room. So if we start thinking a little bit more practical, I think we can accomplish a lot on campus, and similar program as this, and maybe they stay there 9 weeks. Maybe they stay there only 5, and maybe they stay there for a little while and then go to this class and then come back, and then eventually it's a whole mix of stuff. So you can slow it down that way with them, and then you can get very creative and you can differentiate the curriculum instruction, as Del was saying. And also, we can probably get at more than the 450. We can begin to hit towards every kid that is demonstrating that they need these things. So I think that we ought to broaden the way we think about this and not try to do these in some separated buildings off campus that everyone knows is going to be resource intensive and difficult to arrange. We're not going to find places like these. There won't be enough of them, so we got to come up with another ways. And I don't want us to sit around saying, well, we couldn't find a place, so these 700 or 800 more kids are just going to have to suffer through. That is intolerable to me. We go after the 1,300, not 450. We got to go after all, and we got to take what we learned here, see if we can get some partnerships going, but if not, then we do them ourselves, somewhere in our own buildings. That's my point of the deal.
Would it be all right if we talked about that a little bit before moving off of it, TJ?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think this thing about location is key.
Kate and Gloria, Nikki and Gloria, after we take care of this.
No, can I respond to that? I was just going to respond on the location. I mean, it feels to me, and you guys correct me, but it feels to me like being in a different place is part of the power of kind of like breaking patterns that young people are used to over a long period of time from schools. So, and I know that locations are hard, but I mean, it feels like if we're going to make this kind of investment, we should do it in a way that like really breaks those
then we get our
expectations.
We have to make our own. We're not going to find these partners that we're going to have to rent from. We buy our own or build our own.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair, right? I mean, if this is an investment that we want to make, I worry that if we do it kind of within a resource room within a school, it starts to not feel or look that different. And I don't know what
I want these guys to respond to the location thing, but I do want to just interject one quick thing, Dean, and that is I agree. We need to be working with any child who's at risk for any reason. And this particular prototype was aimed at working with a very specific group of students, somewhere along that continuum of of being at risk. And so I just need to say that I don't think the microschool strategy is the appropriate intervention for, every student who's deemed at risk in MMSD. That is not the case. We think this is a very targeted strategy for a subset of those students. We'll have to learn over time how many students would need this kind of intervention. But what are your insights on the location? Because we had a theory going into this that a beautiful space kind of designed for this purpose was the right way to go.
To students.
But
yeah, I'll quickly add, I agree. And to Kate's point, for lack of a better way of saying it, there's it might be hard for some youth to heal in the same environment that might be harming them. Right? So these new spaces can be incredibly powerful for some youth, right? I think it's both and as opposed to either or, right? But I would just add that. I don't know, Paris, Alex.
No, I did all. I think, and I think our high school principals would say the exact same thing. I think our students would benefit from having access to all of the resources and opportunities that a comprehensive school offers, but in a different way, a significantly different way, but still be on campus. And there's some students who would benefit from an equally powerful experience that's not necessarily on campus. There are tremendous benefits and drawbacks on both. I think it's understanding what are the needs of the students and how the team, particularly with students and families, designs that space.
Bringing the voice of the families and students into the space that I've had explicit conversations about, La Follette, MicroSchool, conversations around families saying I don't have to fight with my student to come to the MicroSchool space, like I have to do La Follette. There are certain things or issues with certain kids in the building that they couldn't focus on school, that they're creating this new family at the MicroSchool space is an added piece to that. Families feeling like this space of 1,500 kids or 1,600 kids at La Follette I didn't participate in events and things of that nature like I do now. I mean, you think about me as assistant principal at La Follette and seeing what I anecdotally see in terms of the faces that come to parent-teacher conferences back to school at night. Some of the students who are in MicroSchool, we couldn't get their parents to come to these spaces, and now they're showing up every single time. And it's still in the evening. It's still after work hours. We're providing the same type of stuff, but we got to be very conscious of what the students and families are telling us that they can't get from this comprehensive setting that they were getting in the MicroSchool space.
Okay, Nikki and then Gloria.
Several questions that I have. You stated that the IEP and the disability stuff would be handled in an appropriate manner. How is that going to be done? Will that be done through the Office of Re-Engagement? Would it be done through the IEP? Would it be done through central office?
You're referring specifically to the current MicroSchool, the
Yes.
youth who have. So the conversations and planning and steps need to be taken to transition youth who have an IEP for the MicroSchool to the next step have already begun. They began weeks ago. In terms of future MicroSchool, the Office of Youth Engagement has always, from the get-go, was going to be closely integrated with the other work that's happening here at Central Office. So they're not a standalone team. All of the work that would happen to support IEP transitions was always planned to happen alongside in partnership with special ed services here, with the school sites. I don't know if you would add anything else to that, Alex, or?
No, I think only in that part of the time needed for both the design is contemplating all of the systems, processes, and conversations that need to happen both with the family, the student, and the IEP team to ensure that all the accommodations are accounted for on the front end rather than the back end. What we learned with this particular MicroSchool is that the 4-week window just wasn't adequate enough, while also giving space and time for the student and the family to see this as a viable option for them, at the same time make sure the IEP was revised in a timely manner.
And I think that's a good idea. Just did most of them already have, just one quick of my own as well as 2 others, and one is did most of the students already have transition plans, since transition under Wisconsin state law starts at 14?
Yeah, I think when we're using the term transition plans is just understanding what are the options currently in MMSD what are the pros,
Wanted
the
to make sure.
cons, all the challenges that, and the opportunities that come with looking at these options. I can't emphasize the importance of engaging deeply the students and the families and what these options are, the strengths of each, the challenges of each, including transportation, the history of each of those programs as it relates to the history of the child. Yeah. So, yeah.
I have just two more. Are all the MicroSchool staff NUPs, or are there some union teachers?
Mix.
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 It's a mix. And my last one is, some people are going to say, oh, you're creating a segregated school, playing devil's advocate here. And how do we avoid that perception?
I think the very first step, and that we should do, which we also talk to parents in terms of like addressing not only staff but like the board and stuff, right, is put the parents and the students up front and center. Let them be the voice, let them speak about their experience, what happened, what was going on. I think in terms of a technical way, you understanding and knowing that there are very qualitative and quantitative measures that added to the selection of the microschool students who were part of this process in the system. I think going back to TJ's point about like how would this look? It was a very east side thing, it was a La Folla thing, without really digging into the schools and their needs and their context in terms of what a micro school population would look like. You can't name it because it's me personally being an administrator in the building and not then having an opportunity to lead the micro school. You have to know the inner workings and context of the building and what's needed to know what the population student would be. And it happened to just be this population student that we work with for this 9 weeks of the fall.
TJ, may I ask one more, and then I promise I will stop.
Gloria.
And that is, I know the Freedom from Religion Foundation wrote us a lovely letter about it, hosting it at church. Are we going to do that again? Are we going to find other places? How do we address that issue so we don't get nasty grabs from that?
I think when the community reaches out and says, we have something that we can offer children and families, I don't see how we say no. Unless they're unwilling to follow the policies that we put in place that would free students and families from being pressured into any religious activity, that would be my response.
Gloria.
I just first want to say thank you for all your hard work. I mean, the work that had to go into this, last minute decision making, taking this risk is huge for us. And I think it is needed at a time when we have children in our schools who we're failing, where the environment is just not working for them. And so I commend you for all the work that you've done and your leadership on this, Jen. I think that when we look at, we have to have long-term strategies, right? But we have to build in this short-term intervention piece that we just don't have. And I think this gives us this. I strongly believe in needing a space for it. I strongly believe being able to take a segment of our children out of the environment if it's not working for them on a temporary basis, and then bring them back into the school. I think that's huge. It's an opportunity for us. And, you know, it's just, I'm just proud, I think, right now for what the school district has done on taking this risk. We have to do more of that. So I just wanted to say that, but I think location is huge for us in the environment, in these short-term intervention strategies. As our community changes, the environment changes, the needs change for our children. We see generational trauma in our children. And we have to be able to respond to that immediately and not wait for research or wait for what's going to work. We just have to jump in and take a chance and see if it works. And you guys just did that. And so I'm really proud of the work that you have done. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just also say that the risk, I think everyone participated in the risk taking, including the board. And so we are also thankful that there was support to move forward on behalf of kids. And I just also want us to, because Del, outlined some things in his talk about what we are also doing and continue need to do as it relates to what Pathways is designed to do. It's not an intervention, right? But it's designed to meet more students' needs. Increasing and improving credit recovery is designed to increase options for students. The number of kids, I think we can actually enroll more kids in night school, and we can actually significantly improve night school, which is another option for students. So I think there are multiple layers and options that meet a wide variety. I think we need to continue to deepen and expand. I think the role of Capital High and Shabazz and who they're serving and how they're serving continues to evolve and grow. The MicroSchool is just but one strategy that if we deepen, we'll be able to meet the needs of more students given where they are.
I've got a few questions and maybe some comments, but probably just some questions. One of the issues that Dell kind of raised is the quality of the education and the quality of the credits, and this that if we're and I guess I see that students essentially in 9 weeks get a semester's worth of credit, and that makes me concerned about the quality of the learning that was behind those credits. And I guess is there a response to that? I mean, 3.5 credits is a semester's worth.
Yes. So part of the day was provided to students to recover work from their first quarter, for the third quarter of the second semester. So I could see the challenge if they were just focusing on if they didn't have that option, but there was plenty of opportunities for them to recover and continue. And the courses, particularly where they weren't doing well, we had a bridge team between La Follette staff and the MicroSchool staff. So there's constant conversations about where is the student with this particular course, what work has been completed, what work hasn't. So that, in addition to the courses that they were enrolled in for the MicroSchool, is what yielded those results.
Okay. And the second kind of related question is that if I looked at the list, I don't see a single math or science credit, and both of which are required for graduation. And this kind of And I think that this speaks to what speaks to one issue is the quality of the credits, and but the other issue is it speaks to when we start looking at, is this a path to graduation or is it a transitional healing place and things like that. If it's a path to graduation, you have to have math and science credits, and so I guess that as we consider what kind of credit students are earning when we look at that, and I do think that kind of decision is really important, whether it sits as something, as a transitional piece, or something that this is a placement for students that takes them from 10th grade through graduation. And I think those are two very, very different kind of questions. What was the student-staff ratio in the end? What did it end up being?
We've been asked that question a few times.
Yeah.
You can take a shot at it.
Take a shot. Let me add to that also is that I saw that when I was reading the memo a little closer, I saw that somebody from SA was Selfish Ambition became a full-time person. Were they a full-time MMSD employee, or were they?
Not. They were.
So I guess when we talk student-staff ratio, that's got to be.
Yeah.
That becomes yet another piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I'm trying to crack
give it a guess with and without the partner.
So one of the challenges that Ricardo outlined was both the staffing and the staffing structure.
Right.
Part of our challenge and kind of going to people at that particular time is, hey, would you, outside that one teacher who was full-time and there every day, is not having staff full-time there every day. I mean, parents can talk to you about the significant drawbacks of that. And so when you add up the number of people who are there for maybe a couple of hours a week, right, who maybe had a caseload of one student or two students, plus the volunteer, we actually thought that the gentleman that we brought on from Selfish Ambition, we should have brought him in early. We shouldn't have waited 3 to 4 weeks. That was a need that quickly emerged after the second or third week, given the type of support that students need. And I mean, we can get you specifically on more.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that one of the things is as we plan and as we look at and we look at future proposals and things like that, and also that I think I spoke to Alice that someone I know did similar work in Oakland, and and the point was that we can do this, but we can't scale it and we can't sustain it because it's so intense. I mean, that we can do this at this scale, and we start talking, when Dean starts talking about, a microschool for 13,000 students, someplace between 13 and 13,000 is probably where things land, and probably much closer to the 13. And I guess that's why staffing ratios are real important when you're doing that, as is physical space and things like that, and it's like that. I just want to emphasize, and I think I said I will have one comment, which is that, Nikki brought up the issue of segregation. And I had a little talk with this last week with Alex and Lisa and Ricardo. And I think that when we create environments that are segregated by gender, segregated by race, segregated by ability and disability, that we have to be very conscious of the message we're sending, not only to those who are in that environment, but to the rest of our community. And I think I said to Alex was that my attitude is always that there are social, emotional, educational reasons why, at least on a temporary basis, segregated environments can benefit students very much. I mean, the simple one is something like linguistically segregated environment, where these can benefit students, right? But we have to be very conscious, and we have to, and I think we have to justify it, because we're sending a message that these kids belong separated from those kids, and that's a scary message to send. And I think we have to say that that no, that's not what we want to send. So I just think it's really, really important that we don't sweep it under the rug, that we face it, that we are doing this in a conscious way, and we're doing it for these reasons. And in general, we believe in heterogeneous environments for our students. So that's my comment on this stuff.
One last thing.
Did Dean have one? So I see both Ricardo and Dean. Ricardo, then Dean.
Yeah.
I'll just say, or just add briefly, that personally, the group of students were not sought out to be segregated from the rest of the school body. Rather, it was an opportunity that was presented to them, right? And they were not segregated from La Follette. Like, they had complete access to everything that La Follette had to offer, and they had access to this opportunity specifically designed with them to create something special with them, right? I understand the narrative that perception might create, right? So I think it's on us as a team, particularly to do the work to challenge those narratives that might arise, right? Particularly the role that,
I can't, the idea about empowering families and students to make a choice that best serves them. We had a pretty frank conversation with the families that night, and there were some very uncomfortable moments during that conversation, and we welcomed that, because too far often we tend to run from those very difficult conversations. Particularly, we have parents say right up front, "Are you creating a segregated space for black kids?" And we said no. But if you believe that, and you don't believe that the design of the school and its continuous involvement that includes you and your son's experiences, if a child and the family said this is not for us, they have every right to return. Not only not return to La Follette, but they have the right to consider other options within MMSD, because never did we ever want to send both a message, implicitly or explicitly, that they needed to leave La Follette. It was about how could your needs be met or met, given that the system right now is not meeting your needs. And overwhelmingly, through that difficult conversation, families believed what the ultimate goal was, and that work and that promise was reflected in each of these. And each of those four, I've attended every one of those family meetings, and everyone reflected this idea of meeting needs rather than creating intentional spaces that are not reflective of kids.
And I think to your point, you know, one thing, even personally being like the administrative leader of the site, right, and being in the community and also being connected to other districts, right, is if you're not able to think about the socio-political context of like our society and what typically people will believe and think when you have 13 black males in the space, and go back to your point of like what's the intentionality behind it, what's going on, what's the data to support this, right? You can't run into an issue where people are like, what are you doing? But I will say, you know, being from Beloit and like Madison being up the road and traditionally being a pillar in the state for like what education should look like, I've had a conversation with a central office staff member in Beloit. I've had a conversation with a central office staff member in Kenosha asking, I seen the article at the end of the year about what you guys are doing. Let's talk about that. Because we need to be trying to figure out what should be happening in our school district. So with that also comes, like, when you do innovation work, like people want to ask questions and want to know how can we design to do, and I think Madison like took a huge step in that direction with creating this microscope opportunity for students.
Did you have something you wanted
Yeah,
to say on this topic?
I'm glad we did this. I supported the idea right from the beginning, and ever since I've been on the board, been urging more of this. I'm not happy about it yet. We haven't done anything. I'm waiting to see what this team over the summer comes up with, and they better have something that bounces this and expands on what we learned so that we can reach more than 13. Otherwise, all we did was take the heat off the Follett for a little while. So let's come back, and I'll feel better when we can expand this and reach kids that really need an opportunity like this. And I know we can do it. Some kids can do it on campus. Other kids might need another option. But I know that we can expand this dramatically and do it on campus and off campus at both. And and TJ's right about how intensive and the mix and the match, and you know, you can't even figure out how many staff are there because people were coming and going. That's okay, I get that. I've worked in programs like that where I brought in community partners right and left, and whoever was I could bring in, and it worked very well. But I don't feel bad about this either. So, but I don't feel good yet. So when we got this rolling on a much higher scale with a whole lot more kids, and Dell doesn't come because he knows that we're doing it right, then I'll say I'm gonna feel good about this right now. But good for the work you did. You guys are. This is exactly what we need to be working on. Exactly what I want to see expanded soon. So this group over the summer, I want to hear what they got soon. And then in September, we should have something up and running. Not sitting back saying, well, we're still thinking on it. We've thought enough. This is also, a lot of this stuff is not new. I did this stuff 30 years ago in the programs that I did. So this is new, old stuff coming back, new, and it's staff dependent, and you can get a lot of stuff done. And bring in the resources we need, and we can do it. We got our own resources where we don't get our community partners. They're there. It's imperative that we use them. I agree 100%. But this was not just a one semester thing for 9 weeks that we can say we did it and we feel good about it. I don't feel good about this, people. Not yet. So make me feel good.
I hear that.
Okay, I'll give a quick thank you and final thoughts. I think the superintendent has final thoughts. Any board members, final thoughts?
I want
It's
to
yours,
thank
Jen.
these guys again. I'll try not to get emotional this time, but I do want to especially thank Lee Vierstra, who is the lead teacher, the one person who is full-time, helping us serve this really brilliant group of students better, and to help us learn. I had been in Lee's class when she was teaching at East, and thought she was a fantastic teacher there. When I saw her classroom at the Microschool, it was just as if, in some respects, that I was in an AP English class at any of our high schools. I mean, walled with anchor charts, tracking students' deep thinking on the text that they were exploring. I mean, it was so impressive. I know I used the term about healing earlier, but this was healing through, right, deeply authentic intellectual work. So kudos to you and to Lee. Thank you, TJ.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And catch your flight.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, the next two items we have on the agenda, the at-risk plan and the middle school start time, are both action items for the upcoming board meeting, for the July board meeting. So it is at-risk plan, and I see Matt
And Caroline.
and Caroline getting up, and I don't know if anyone else is joining them, but
Nope.
I think it's just Matt and Caroline. And
A lot of attachments.
a lot of attachments. And if I recall, there's not really, well, there's the timeline. If you want to put up a graphic, the timeline's probably as good as any, but if you don't want a graphic, that's fine too. We don't have to work through a PowerPoint.
we're
If
not
you just
going
want to
to.
kind of summarize what we're doing today, what changes have been made, and what the next steps are, and particularly in terms of, I know that both board members and members of the public had concerns about learning more about what happened with the at-risk plan this year. And that's a month or so away. So, take it away.
Okay, so we're here really.
Actually, first, I think we have to congratulate Matt that this is your first work group as legal counsel for the district. So, there we go.
Doesn't look like it feels you anymore.
Thank you. I'm all flustered.
That was the point.
Yeah. So we're here really because the at-risk plan needs to be re-upped. By statute and administrative rule, we need to re-adopt the at-risk plan by August 15th, and that's an annual adoption. So that's the true reason we're here. Just a little bit of historical background. The at-risk plan was first approved by the board in October of 2016. It was re-adopted again in August of 2017, and we're up for renewal again. And I just want to lay some context for what the plan is and what it isn't. You won't see individual plans for students set forth within the at-risk plan. What it is a framework of procedures as to how we identify students, how we, as at risk, how we notify families that we've identified their child as at risk, how we work with families, how we develop plans, some of the possible interventions we might incorporate into a plan. But it's really a procedural document as to how we identify, work with, and hopefully eventually get a student moved off of that at-risk list. That's the ultimate goal of the plan. So, having given that intro, I will turn it over to Caroline, who's done a ton of work with implementing and working with the schools on developing that risk plan.
Great, thank you, Matt. So this school year was our first year of implementation of the at-risk plan, and I'm proud to say that we have implemented according to the timeline. The timeline is up on the screen, and it was, I noted back there on the table, and these were like really just condensed sort of Cliff's notes, what the actions were at various phases of our timeline, and it was meant for school staff to keep track of what they were supposed to do with the plan. So the plan is actually implemented at the school level. So this for us was really all about supporting schools in terms of helping them implement the plan. So we, throughout the year, since this was our first year, we continued to build and refine our infrastructure for implementation, which included a documentation system within Infinite Campus so that schools could record their work in progress. It also included an implementation monitoring system, which was part one-on-one support to schools, as well as a data dashboard monitoring report where schools could keep track of their progress, and then also the district could keep track of, in aggregate, how are we doing as a district in terms of implementing the timeline. And so we were able to keep track of the 4 steps, which is the timeline, is lists are finalized. It's a kind of a strange timeline, but the lists are finalized at the end of July when we have all of our data in. So we are waiting to get our finalized assessment scores in Infinite Campus to be able to finalize our students who met the criteria for being at risk of not graduating last year. And then we will implement accordingly based off of that list. So then once they're identified, then we need to do some initial outreach and contact parents, families, guardians, letting them know about our at-risk plan and what they can expect next, which would really be a letter home informing them of why their students were at risk, what criteria they met, as well as contact to the schools. And then saying that also schools are going to be following up with you again. So then there's actually a second contact after that first contact and letter are sent. And then schools invite families, guardians, parents in to really co-construct a plan of supports for their students. So as you can guess, each student on the list is really a unique individual in and of themselves, and really schools are trying to match the support that they need and have demonstrated a need for. And that's why the Office of Youth Reengagement is pretty exciting, because there was just a subset of students that we had gaps for support in. So that will be a nice addition to supports available for students who weren't coming to school or who were coming and not attending. So there'll be some more additional wraparound support for them. And then in addition to that, we've been developing supportive tools and resources for schools. And so after our implementation efforts, and we've really, this is an ongoing thing. We don't stop after we do those 4 steps. We check in, we monitor their progress, we check in, see how they're doing. Do we need to revise and adjust a plan? Do they seem like they're going to be on the path for being, on track for graduation instead of being off track. And so we do that through monitoring through our student supports and intervention teams or IEP team meetings. And so it's really something that's kept track of across the year. And so we start thinking about and knowing if they're going to be on or off track, because we start with some preliminary lists. So even though we don't have our finalized data, we have a preliminary list of so now it's our 2nd year, so we'll have a preliminary list of those students who look like they're going to be at risk or new ones who have come on. And so schools can start actually dealing with that prior to receiving the finalized list, so they can do some more proactive work. And where that comes into play is really in terms of our supports through summer school, because summer school can be a viable option for intervention and supports for students. And we're working really hard with this plan to sort of mobilize all of our systems moving in sort of the same direction, right? So we've got a lot of different processes, and this really serves to pull those processes together to really support students and match, again, supports to their needs. But summer school this year is super exciting. So our students who were up for 8th grade non-promotion have the opportunity to go to summer school and become promoted and 9th graders. But we wanted to make sure that they were getting ahead. And so with successful opportunity of mastering standards and skills that they were struggling with, they have the option with our freshman 101 class to actually earn credit through the youth employment. So it's a super exciting opportunity that students who have been looking like they're at risk of not graduating from high school in 8th grade can actually earn credits before actually entering STEP in high school. So that's pretty exciting. They haven't had the opportunity to do that before. So. Okay.
Once you wrap,
okay, sorry.
So,
Okay, so after first semester, we did hold after action reviews with all of our school level users just to see, is the plan meeting their needs? They all felt the plan was meeting their school level needs, and it does, as Matt say, meet our statutory requirements for the plan. However, they did provide feedback in terms of the letters and really wanting to simplify the letters a little bit, take out some confusing language. We tried in an area trying to connect too many processes. It just resulted in communication mayhem. So taking some things out, just making it simple. We're also, this isn't part of the plan, but working with Dell and his work in terms of parent communication. We're working with our communications department to provide a family insert in the letter that's really simple, something like the bookmark, but that would fit in a letter. And then as well as to have those available in school offices, as well as if anyone should go out and work with our families. So that's exciting. And then we are also adding a fifth, we're proposing to add a fifth letter for students who are already enrolled in our alternative programs. So it seems silly to send a letter saying your student is at risk, because we know that they were at risk because they were already enrolled in a program. So acknowledging and celebrating the fact that they, should they meet all program requirements, that they will be on track for graduation, and giving them a contact. So that's the fifth letter. So it would be alternative programs, Capitol High, Shabazz, Operation Fresh Start, Gateway to College, Horizon, Night School, Omega. So that's why you'll find that fifth letter. And then the timeline was the other small modification within the plan, and it was adjusted through the end of November to accommodate naturally occurring points of contact with families. So that would be parent-teacher conferences that occur in November. And then also around end of October, November, we're likely to see more habitual truancy conferences, and that's just another checkpoint where you can combine the work together. And so we are extending that through the end of November to allow schools that flexibility to know that there's going to be a checkpoint of where they're going to be connecting with the families in person or on the phone or otherwise.
Okay. Nikki has a question or a comment.
I have two questions, one comment. I will make them quick. Dell has mentioned this before, and I've seen this before, of kids getting to the mailbox first. And so the parents never see the letter. In fact, I have that happen with my juveniles constantly. How do we make sure the parents are getting it? Do we follow up with an email? Additionally, if they're homeless and don't have an address, how are we getting a hold of these students?
Schools are doing their due diligence in terms of reaching out prior to the letters coming. So they're reaching out if the student isn't of age, right, and still a minor, then they're contacting families that with addresses and contact that we have on file. This is the reason that we have those preliminary lists in spring, because what happens is our TEP status resets in September, and so we really make that effort to ensure that we have the most current address for those students who had a TEP designation throughout the year. And so then we have those already going and can hit the ground running. So we are doing our due diligence on that. If the student is of age and the majority, and then we reach out to actually them. So we will be calling students and letting them know in person about what this letter is that's coming in the mail, and the letter is actually sent to them. So, good question.
I was wrong, TJ. I have one more question and
One more
comment.
than James.
Yes, and my one question and then my one comment. My comment is, just recently dealt with a student who was at West, transferred to Capitol High, was Mark Truant for every day he missed at West while he was at Capitol High. How do we edit? They sent it to the court. How do we prevent that from happening?
So we've done a number of things, and yes, that is a problem, because our data that we have in Infinite Campus is only as good as the data that we put into it. So we've been really vigilant this year in terms of monitoring that data, and what we did was we realized that we didn't have a mechanism to alert the new school receiving the student who was at a different school that they had come to their school, right? So they need to pick up the process where it left off. So now what we do is have an auto email sent as soon as they are enrolled in the new school. So in this case, Capital, then Karen Stocks Glover would be getting an email saying, you have a new student who is also meeting the criteria for at risk. If you're not the person who should be in charge of this, please forward it on to that person who is managing those students who are at risk, so that they can be vigilant that doesn't happen. So yeah, we've run into some situations where we've really had to double back and figure out how to not let those things happen, because it's disastrous for students and
Because
families.
I was at the court the particular day and saw it and went, this isn't good.
No. So
Not
again, that is
good.
our message, that we really need to pay attention to our attendance data.
James and then Dean.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to figure out how this actually works. And I apologize, you probably said it, and I probably just didn't hear it. And so we have the students that are at risk, and we're sending them notification information. And so one of the remedies, for example, summer school. But these remedies have always existed. So how does this work? I mean, if the remedies have always been on the table, why would they use it now? Is it just that they didn't know that these were some of the remedies, or if you're behind? I mean, seems like everything we're talking about has been in existence. So help me understand how it would.
It's a good question. I mean, we're trying to be more proactive in our supports that we put in place for the students, and making sure that it matches the students' needs. So, for example, when we got this original list, again, each student is unique. They might have the same factors, but when you dig into or the same indicators, but when you dig into the data, different things emerge. So you might have one student who has the same risk factors and they're attending school. The other one might have the same one with habitual truancy with it and not attending. And so they're very different in terms of what they need. And so it's just having schools be really thoughtful and think through what their needs are in terms of what the menu of options are available to them and what they have skills for to be able to implement, as well as thinking from a district perspective, what are our gaps in terms of what we don't have, because I mean we have a lot more students on the list than we would actually like to be on the list.
So will the initiative be coming from, once you send a letter out, from the families, or will the schools be taking some action?
Yeah, the schools manage their own process from start to finish.
Whatever their student load is, so the schools will be reaching out to each individual student and have identified through whatever their risk factors are.
Yes.
And saying, this is probably what you need.
And it's quite intensive on the school end. And they have a matrix of supports that's specific to their schools that they can think through to help them think what would be most meaningful. Of course, we want more alternative options, and we are making a move there with that, because one of the things that we brainstormed was doing a microschool, and that's so awesome that it came to fruition, because we could be able to see how that worked and what we need to do more fully with that. But that's a subset of kids that needed that, and they were definitely at risk of not graduating. So yes, the uniqueness and really the thinking through and the problem solving about what they need is really important. And I think, to your point, James, we have had these interventions over time, and I think we're trying to figure out how they can be more meaningful and supportive to them. And so summer school changing to things like offering credit before you're even getting to high school, like that's something that's unique and would give them a leg up and really understanding the importance of credits when then transitioning to high school. And then our transition work that we're doing across critical levels, from 5th to 6th, and that's really when we're starting to identify those students, really being proactive and preventative on the front end, because that's where we feel like in the next couple of years if we, you know, hit the ground running with home visits, wraparound services, we're going to change their trajectory. And in the long run, we're going to be changing the trajectory of many students, more than sort of just doing it 1 year by 1 year and sort of looking at that cross-sectional data. I think really getting in on the front end as well is essential into making a difference to shift their trajectory.
I'm going to add two things just from my understanding of what's different too, in addition to these, and I think that being proactive is very important. I think that the plan requires and documents improved communication and improved collaboration with families. And I think also that the plan also will give us an opportunity to reflect and look at where our students are, where our students are, how our students are getting into this category, how effective what we're doing is, and things like that. So I think it gives it gives us a kind of a framework to track that and learn from it. So those would be, in addition to, like, you know, the those would be the two big things that I would see as having changed. I think Jen had something she wanted to say, or did you?
Say something along the same lines.
Okay, Dean, Gloria.
Okay, two things. I've been concerned about the tone of letters that go home to families in regards to kids in their kids being in at-risk programs or stuff, so that they be much more supportive and not judgmental and accusational. This is better. But I do have a question, technical question about the first two paragraphs. I'm looking at the 9th to 10th clean one, but the first two paragraphs in all the letters are all the same. The second sentence in the first paragraph says we measure success in a number of ways using both district-defined and state-required standards. Then the first sentence in the second paragraph in all the letters say the purpose of this letter is to notify you that the student has been identified as meeting state-defined criteria of being considered a student at risk. There's no mention of that it's a possible district-defined thing. So is there two different, do we have two different standards here, or are there different criteria for being considered district at risk as opposed to state?
So the definition of at risk is a state definition. It's in the administrative rules. It's part of some of the materials that were sent part of this packet, and I can just read them for you here. And so it truly is a state definition. We can't change that.
Yeah, I understand that, but
yeah.
Is there a different criteria for district where we would consider a kid at risk have met did not the state requirements? So
right. So we have an early warning system that we look at a number of indicators, some of which are the same as the state defined criteria, but there are some nuances. So the early warning system is meant to be an early detection system about possible risk. It's not saying that they are at risk. It's just saying that the likelihood that they may become at risk.
So we're being a little bit more proactive.
Yes.
Before they get to the state-defined thing, so that we have to, then we're required to take some other action. So we're
right. So the likelihood that families and guardians would have interacted with schools in terms of performance and being on track or off track is pretty great. And this distinction between district defined and state defined is really important, especially to families, because they're realizing, oh, the district is not doing yet another thing. This is another layer on top of what the school already does to monitor on-track status. So that actually is really helpful to families when they reach out to call and say, hey, we monitor this in multiple ways, and as you know, we've worked with you on increasing your number of credits and attending school, and hey, there's this other monitoring.
So what you're telling us is that prior to getting this letter that says, okay, you are officially state defined as at risk, the school will reach out to the parents and the family and say, hey, your kid is struggling. So are there letters like this that go out and say the district is there another letter that goes out prior to getting this one? Or
Nope, they're
how
just
is that
making, they're
contact
making
made?
a call, and we really stress the importance of knowing the student before someone from the school reaches out and calls them. So who's ever calling or contacting the family, they're really doing their due diligence and knowing about that student and what some of their issues or struggles have been. And in most cases, some cases, they've been on the radar before and they've had contact with families. And so if school personnel have had a contact with families before, they're the ones that are likely to call and reach out. So it's a familiar person.
Okay. Well, then I'd suggest that you take another look at that second sentence in the first paragraph. Because if I'm confused about it, and I still am,
Sure.
and I understand, thank you, I think I got it, but
Okay.
but I think I know a little bit more about how this school district works because of being here. I think that maybe you should either strike that, because you've already contacted them, but I don't know. I think you rethink the second sentence.
Okay.
Gloria.
Thank you.
This may be something our re-engagement office may do, but I know in other school districts and cities across the country, they have these outreach sort of, mentors that actually go out there, because it seems to be the disconnect, right? It's not enough just to send a letter or making a phone call. It is actually going to the Salvation Army if they're there, or, the Beacon or somewhere, in the neighborhood. So is that something that
we
you would
encourage face-to-face visits.
You do that? You have staff that actually go and knock on doors and
I mean, each school has a different comfort level, but we definitely suggest that is an option and is very meaningful to the families. We also know that there is, in general, ongoing need for mentorship, and that is a evidence-based strategy that is and can be helpful.
Yeah, I'm almost thinking that because of our challenges, that it instead of just an option, that it is something that is part of the process of of getting out there, right?
Yeah, and I think prioritizing too about those who, yes, a home visit or a neighborhood center visit or any place visit would be great. The amount of students that we have on the list, we have to have the option to be able to do, many different ways of getting in touch with family. But I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, Gloria, just to interject really quick, I think that we have been wanting to explore how to formalize, home visitation certainly happens in a variety of forms, not necessarily at a home. But I think that with Michelle's work, we've been very interested in investing more in the skills to be able to use home visitation effectively. I think there's more to be done in this area.
Yeah, and I think some cities also have utilized outside partners to do this, right? Organizations to actually who already are working in this, somewhat in this area, to go and add this to their programming.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. Thank you.
And then Kate, a couple questions and kind of melding into comments on the letters. The plan itself has kind of three categories for eighth graders. It's eighth graders who fall at the bottom range in all subject areas on state mandated assessment of knowledge and concepts, and eighth graders who failed the state mandated assessment of knowledge and concepts. What's the difference between falling into the bottom category and failing?
One is all subject areas, and the other one is math and reading.
Okay, it doesn't say math and reading here.
I know. This is literally from the state statute.
Okay. But that means math and reading?
Yeah, it's basically bullet number 2.
All right, I'm still confused then, but I'll let it go. It's just that I thought that was the difference, was that if you failed, but all right, I'll let that go. Letters, all the letters except for one say at the bottom someone will be contacting you. Is there a reason why the letters don't identify who that person will be?
Well, the
The
principal
letter's from the
is-
principal,
is-
and, but, you know, sometimes it might
Yeah.
be the guidance counselor, sometimes it might be the
Right.
social worker. But I
'Cause
think that,
sometimes-
that if I was a parent,
Yeah.
I'd like to know who's gonna be calling me.
Mhm.
And I think at the time the letter's been sent, that there should have been a conversation among the staff saying, all right, this is gonna be on your caseload, this is gonna be it. So that's just kind of, you know, I think wherever possible, that if you can give parents a name of who's gonna be calling,
Mhm.
I think that that's real important. And then the one letter that doesn't have it is the alternative letter. And you said if somebody's already in an alternative program, but I look at, you know, habitual truancy in our alternative programs is incredibly high. We have students who are adjudicated youth. We have students who are not collecting credits. And so we have students in our alternative programs who are, by definition, either at risk or continuing to be at risk or falling into the at-risk category. So I guess I think that the alternative letter should also have a phone call attached to it. And because, again, because every student's unique, and just because they made it into an alternative program doesn't mean they don't need a phone call. So
Correct.
that's where I'm at. And it was Kate, and then back to Nikki.
Yeah, I mean, I have just a kind of a quick comment, maybe keying off of some of what Gloria and James have said. So this feels very similar to some of our AL conversations around kind of state statute and very focused on identification of youth. And so I would just love to, the next time we talk about this, focus on the programs and services that we're supporting these youth with. I think to kind of James's earlier comment, there is a lot of activity that we do, and we know that we could be much better in terms of tailoring those supports to what young people and families want and need. And so, I mean, I think to the earlier conversation we had tonight, we are staffing an office in this area. So the next time we speak to this, I would just love to see how we want to think about those supports differently.
You were saying about the second part of the letter, you were quoting from state statute, correct? I know that state statute, it's a ceiling, it's a floor, not a ceiling. Is there a way we can add our own definition along with it to make it stronger than the state standards and to explain that it means math and reading for clarification purposes?
I just want to clarify that quick. I think the reason why math and reading was specifically called out is because one of the criteria that allows you to qualify for at-risk is that you are 2 or more years behind age group in basic skill levels. Basic skill levels are defined as reading and math. So that's where that comes from.
Just for clarity's sake,
Yeah,
that
sure.
what we can do there, even if it's just parenthetical and, you know, and with a little note saying, you know, Ed, you know, that we added this or something.
Sure.
I think that would be really good. Final thoughts? Oh, I guess actually I've got a question, is that when will we be seeing the implementation, data and information, and will that be an agenda item?
Yep, I think similar timeline from last year, which was September, October-ish.
Okay.
But I think it just depends what the how the calendar is set, but yes, I plan to.
Yeah, the board calendar hasn't been determined what the topics are yet, TJ. That'll come out of our organizational meeting in August. But certainly the date will be in your hands in September. And that's mainly the number of students identified as at risk. That's what we're talking about.
And under which categories?
And
I
under which
assume.
categories,
And
yep.
something about how we responded and what kind of, you know, what we did, what kind of interventions we did, I would hope. That's the piece that I think Kate's getting at, is there. James, you had your hand up?
I just wondered, what's the time frame for this work? Is there a time frame? And at the end of, at some point, will we be able to talk about how successful we've been and what that will look like?
I think this is where I feel like we're stuck in this world between the annual compliance requirements from DPI, which means that we have to put this on the calendar every year at this time of year, because by August 15th, we have to say we did it, which is all about making sure that we actually have a plan that includes all the procedures that these guys just described. So that will continue to happen every year. And it is a bit of, I don't know who said box checking. Somebody said something like that. It does feel a little bit like that. It does for me too. And I can tell from the conversation that there's a real desire to dig into how we're intervening with students who are struggling on a variety of indicators. And I think that's a discussion we should have about when and how we want to agendize that for, you know, in alignment with our priorities, our goals, and that makes a lot of sense to me.
I don't understand the comment. So are we saying we're doing this simply because DPI is mandated, or we're saying this because this is something we need to do? We have kids that are behind. I mean, so what,
for both reasons. I'm saying that the reason we're having a meeting tonight that is leading to a vote at the end of this month is because DPI requires us to have you do so every year at this year by August 15th.
I mean, we have kids that are behind, so I was asking about, you know, what are we going to do with those kids?
And I'm in agreement with that,
I understand the DPI
James.
part, the law and all of that, but
yeah.
So this doesn't seem to me that should be totally the reason why we're doing this.
And it isn't, James. We would be doing this work even if DPI did not require that, but the board would be agendizing the discussion a bit differently, right? We would be having a slightly different discussion. And so, James, I'm not in disagreement with you. I actually think we're in agreement. I just want to be crystal clear on why the board is voting at the end of this month. And looking forward to more conversation about how we reach at-risk youth in our school district. Right.
Do we have that built into do we have it built into our meetings as far as?
We don't, and what I was mentioning to TJ was that at our August organizational meeting, that's the meeting annually when we decide on what topics we want to dig into, prioritize as a board, and this could be on the short list, and I think it might very well be.
I would just say that they're at-risk plan, but and within the so I think that the more general discussion of MTSS. And
right,
like
that's
that,
what that's the difference.
And that might be a multi-stage discussion. Is kind of my feeling, but we'll leave that for August. Final thoughts? Thank you.
Thank you.
We will see you at the end of the month. All right. The last item on the agenda is school start times. We no longer say middle school start times because we're acknowledging that elementary school start times are changing also. And the team, we have Karen and Mike, who have taken us a long way on this one, from a time from something that many thought was impossible to something that looks like it's very, very doable in my opinion, and will be voted on at the end of the month. So for board members, questions, adjustments, concerns prior to the vote, tonight is a good time to voice them.
Mike, your ties are always very appropriate.
Yeah, I like that one.
Take that on purpose.
That's your concern.
All right, let's go.
All right, go.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh, and I will say, Mike and I and Karen and I in our prep meeting earlier today knew that this would be late on the agenda, and if there is a desire to move quickly to what's new, we're happy to fast forward.
There is.
Is there?
Okay.
Yes.
To chase it. Always appreciate
we
the
predicted that might be
to present to you. And, you know, it's amazing that we were sitting here over 2 years ago when I was still working every day here and thinking that we just can't do this because cost was a problem and because of many barriers. Well, here we are 2 years later where we've come up a plan that's workable, that has very good support, and it's going to make a difference for kids. It just keeps getting better. And so our purpose tonight is just to make sure you have no further questions before you vote at the end of the month. But we can do this. We've delved deeply into the logistics. So just cutting quite to the chase, this is really the work that we have done since we last met. We did something a little bit different this time. We created a webcast for people to listen. And we did this because it's so complex. And much more surprised with that webcast, we received over 1,000 hits, which was surprising. In addition, we also received a lot of feedback from that, and want you to know that we reached out individually to every single person to either answer their questions or provide clarification or acknowledge what their concerns were. The next piece we did was really to conduct feedback sessions, and I'll go through those. And then we did a third survey, and like this meeting here, there's deja vu, I think, from our parents, like another middle school start time survey. But we did learn some interesting things. And then finally, as all the way through this process, just getting additional information from different district departments. And that might have been based on something we heard at a feedback session. A prime example would be from special ed parent wondering if we had talked specifically with our special ed coordinators and in terms of additional services. So I then set up a conference call with the coordinators to dig a little bit deeply into that. But we have worked incredibly thoughtful in making sure that we're touching every stakeholder, every different department that this affects, so that we aren't missing anything. Looking at the feedback sessions, and there were two highlights of the feedback sessions. I think one of the disappointments were, and it would be for April and May, is not a lot of participants, 75 people, mostly white, mostly parents. However, we did learn two really, to me, important things. One is just the almost demand for making sure we did another survey, because in the past our surveys did not indicate we were affecting the elementary schools. So we did that third survey. The other thing was, and this was the part that really gave me some hope and that was interesting, is the opportunity for elementary only parents who maybe had a mindset, being able to interact with people that have had that currently have middle school parents or kids, so that they could speak specifically parent to parent about the current state of affairs for middle school, and watching people shift their thinking through that meeting, which gives us hope that as we continue this journey, if you so choose, that we really capitalize on that parent interaction. So what did we learn? So in terms of the feedback sessions, in terms of additional suggestions, certainly providing the details, continuing to get more feedback, and addressing specific concerns. So we learned at the focus group, like we believe that we're providing a better level of service in switching our children from Madison Metro to yellow buses. One, from a safety and jurisdiction standpoint, and secondly, that parents won't have to buy the bus pass. What we also learned is that there's going to be a segment of parents that don't qualify for busing but use Madison Metro that may not have an option. So, that was very interesting for us to find out and think about how in the planning year we can look at, is there a safety concern? Do we need to work with the city? Safe routes to school. So again, the focus groups helped us learn additional information. One of the things that we've heard specifically all through this is, will you just get on with it and do it? And let's start next year. And why are you phasing it in? And of course, you know, as we've talked before, that staffing for the bus company and the logistics require us to take that planning year and really make sure we're covering every single detail. Also, parents concerned about before and after school planning. And so we know we've worked with MSCR in terms of some additional options for after school care and with our stakeholders. You know, the bus pass still comes up from our parents, and that's something that we'll work with the city on how they can encourage bus pass and maybe provide a reduced fee bus pass, but that will certainly be part of our work in the planning year. You know, the other piece we learned in terms of communication, and you'll notice that every time we've talked about communication. And I think we get better at it, but it's something that we need to continually reflect on, and how we're getting the word out and using multiple avenues and taking advantage of when we have parents together. The other thing that I think we learned at the focus groups was that year of planning, while it might take a while, is really going to be important for parents. And so we've already been thinking conceptually about what are the to-dos on that planning year. Then we also just talked about, if we do a great job, what does it look like? And we hope to see the favorable outcomes that we've been talking about. Because if we don't keep at forefront that this is one piece of a large picture in terms of increasing the attendance and achievement and decreasing behavioral referrals, which is what has driven us in terms of the research, along with our current middle school parents, talking to the board about getting on the bus at 20 or 25 to 7 for a middle school creature is too early. And I say that with fondness as a former middle school principal. So moving then to the last piece, let me be clear, there are some families that really don't want to do this. And so you as a board will have to make a decision whether the benefits outweigh the inconvenience that will cause for some parents. And I know from the research that this is doable and that this is something that I believe has a positive impact on children and outcomes. And let's see here. The next thing is you've got the survey results, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. But again, when you look at our parents overall, again, almost 3/4 of our parents support this move. Child care comes up, communication comes up. And I was also pleased that we did succeed in getting a good elementary turnout with over 60% were elementary parents who responded to this. We also had a number of parents that opened it that didn't complete it, which indicates to us perhaps that survey fatigue on this topic or discussion fatigue and in general support. So I think you know that we've been planning very purposefully in terms of the work streams. I don't think I need at this point to go into you. I think that really kind of summarizes very quickly, and you know I love to talk about this, so I've really done some condensing here, but we would welcome your questions and thoughts on this matter.
TJ?
Gloria, yes.
So I wasn't here for this discussion, so I just have a couple questions, or a few months back. So the parents who who are opposed to this, what are their issues primarily with this?
Okay, so that's a great question. And I think it varies depending on the parents, but I think in summary, it has to do with schedules in the morning.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is, if you really think about it, we are not doing anything with this plan that we aren't really currently doing with respect to start times.
Mm-hmm.
So right now we have 21 schools that begin at 7:35 or 7:45. Mm-hmm. If this proposed plan goes through, we will have 23 schools that will not begin before 7:50.
Mm-hmm.
Probably about the same number of students because there'll be fewer middle school students. So that's one thing. And so parents are trying to figure out, well, gosh, my middle school student might have to get themselves off.
Mm-hmm.
That's true, and parents talked about how they increase independence. The other thing is we know from at-risk behavior that we'd rather have them get themselves off in the morning than be unattended by themselves for a couple hours at night. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and then another question, what about the demographics of those, you kept the demographics of those who, approve, or, did you get the demographics of those who were opposed? I'm just wondering if we're disproportionately impacting a segment of our community by this change.
I don't know the total answer to that question. I can tell you that generally speaking, we have a similar response rate. In talking about with individually with parents, both low income, not low income, most parents of color or not. It's really about, well, if you're going to move the start time a little bit later, will there be options for us to drop our kids off early? And so then during the planning year, we'll take a look at what are the services or possibilities that we can offer for parents.
Yeah, that was my next question, if MSCR was going to offer anything in the mornings.
We met with MSCR, and of course, what will drive this is need. And so actually before school care across the district has actually decreased over the last few years. There's far fewer sites provided before school care. The other thing is sometimes parents will say, well, we really want this, and it gets time for their 7th grader. It's like, I don't need anybody to, I don't need to go to before school care. I'm old enough. So, you know, that's the discussion as you move up into middle school, parents have with their children.
Okay.
You know, there's some parents, well, what if he misses the bus and there's no one to call? And it's like, you know, we're always encourage parents to what's your backup plan. So like with after school dismissal, this district provides a lot of flexibility. On Mondays and Wednesdays, you can stop at this family or this parent who has custody, and Tuesdays and Thursdays and every third Friday you can go here. And sometimes a child gets on the wrong day and ends up and there's nobody to greet them. And it's very scary. So we talk every year, we send out articles, what's your backup plan? What happens if your child gets off? So it's like, these are encouraging parents to always have plans is really important for them to feel safe when they're at work, that we're taking care of their child.
Thank you.
Kate?
Thank you. I think it's exciting that we are getting close to a vote on this, and I probably would be one of the voices saying let's try to go a little faster. And I know you'll tell me that's not possible, but I feel like we need to say it anyways. Maybe just on the need driving before and after school care. This would be my one strong push for the next year. Other than just making sure we have the communication plan put together. Before and after school care is just hard for families today. All families, it's just hard.
Yeah,
and so I mean, I want to really impress upon us for both after school care for younger children. If we're switching 13 more schools to be an hour earlier, that's like 4,000 more elementary aged children in our city that will potentially need after school care from either private, semi-private, public, some combination of all of the constellation of childcare options that families put together. So there's just some work to do with, like, even outside of MSCR, private centers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And the struggle, the struggle of having a principal and work with this is right now there's a shortage of staff to staff those.
There absolutely is.
This problem doesn't fix that.
No, but this is something that we need to get ahead of with, in particular, some of the childcare deserts in the city on the north side, et cetera. So
that this may improve it because it will increase the number of hours people work, so maybe people will feel it's worthwhile. So it'll be interesting to see, but I mean, we've heard loud and clear through every single venue that we've talked with parents that this is a concern.
Yeah, I think I'm encouraging us to reach out directly to childcare centers that offer after-school care.
That would be part of our planning work.
We can get them to start communicating with their constituents very early to gauge space, et cetera, et cetera.
That's a whole work stream in the plan.
And then the flip side for before school care, there are a number of circumstances that I can imagine parents wanting before school care for middle school students, and so I certainly would want to have a complete plan there for families should they decide that they are interested in that. So just it's before and after school care is just, it's a daily struggle, and if this is an opportunity for us to help in more ways than simply changing start times, that's a positive thing for families and for kids. So
thank you.
I just want to say thank you, and I also want to ask that if we could have the language for the vote this week rather than right before we take the vote, or the sooner the better, because it's so that we can know in case we have to adjust what the language for the vote is. That would be appreciated.
That'd be really helpful.
So, but other than that, good work, and I will be really happy once we take the vote. I think I will be, unless I get surprised by the outcome of it. So, last thoughts on this?
All right.
Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
time.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? Imad, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, we are adjourned.
Jen, it was the Reese case that they charged him with truancy.